Hello everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and boy do I have some interesting things to share with you today regarding the new ballistic system in 12.12. This may require a complete re-evaluation from the player base as to what is good and when to use what ammo. I was toying with the idea of doing some tests for common rounds like M856A1, 7.62BP, etc. because there were lots of questions in the community about how much the range affected things like damage and penetration. But there is an incredible new resource that has been released very recently that we'll be looking at in a moment, which is much better than anything I could do on my own. Many people have been reporting not getting one-tap headshots with assault rifle rounds over distance, partially spotted due to so many players fighting rogues from 300 plus meters, but also in routine PMC encounters too. This is probably the piece of information that's been discussed the most broadly, but I'm not going to linger too long on this topic specifically because OnePeg did a great video on it that I'll link down below for you to check out. But the summary is that versus Class 4 helmets, there is a very limited selection of rounds that will one-tap over 100 meters now. This is firstly due to damage drop-off falling below the 35 head HP threshold, and secondly the penetration value on other rounds getting too low to get through the helmet anymore. Most high-pen rounds have low damage, so fall below the 35 threshold quickly, and rounds with higher damage tend to have lower pen, falling below the level required to consistently penetrate Class 4 armor itself. This was already adjusted once by BSG, so it's not quite as extreme as the first implementation, but once damage mitigation is taken into account from armor, this still causes quite a few rounds to fail. Okay, so now everybody loves SNB or M61 for sniping, fine, but where does that leave the entire rest of the ammo selection? Well, there is a new website that's been created by a bunch of community stalwarts over at TarkovBallistics.com, and in their words, this is the beginning of the ultimate resource for Tarkov Ballistics. Using this site, we can glean some already really useful information, and at the moment there are a few working sections. Each piece of ammo has its own page with a chart for bullet drop, velocity over range, and a data table for damage and pen at different distances. Then we have aggregated penetration and damage charts at different ranges for all the ammo from 100 meters up to 1 kilometer in distance. And finally, there is armor information with pen chance, armor and blunt damage, and shots to 75% penetration chance. There is a lot of information in here, so let's break it down a bit. Let's start by visiting the M80 page because this ammo has gathered a lot of attention this wipe, with Class 4 armor being the short-term maximum that anybody can use before players have level 3 ragban and above. As we know, the M80 round starts with 80 damage and 41 pen, which is why historically it has always been so good in this particular category. However, over range, we can see here that the velocity drops fairly quickly. This chart shows the fraction of the initial velocity, so at 200 meters you still have approximately 90% of the initial velocity left. Practically, this has a dramatic effect on the damage and the penetration of the round. These also scale proportionally with the velocity, so at 200 meters you have 10% of your damage and penetration value removed. This is the 71.7 damage and 36.8 pen that we can see here. So at 200 meters, M80 after 12.12 acts much more like 56A1 or 545BT pre-12.12, but with more damage. How does this tie back into the calculations that we've always used previously? Do we have to throw everything out of the window and start again? Well, if we use the penetration by class table and look at M80, we can see this has a value of 73.5%. If your question at this point is, but how does this thing have over 90% chance to pen versus class 4? Well, that was exactly my question too. However, the listings here on this website are done at 100 meters as a starting point, so you already have some damage and pen fall off. At 100 meters, the ammo specific page tells us that the pen is 38.8. Using Veritas's Battle Buddy app to check out the pen chance for 38 and 39 pen gets 65.2% and 75.8%, so our 73.5% pen chance for M80 is neatly in the middle of these two and it all checks out. So for this specific round M80, most encounters are under 100 meters in Tarkov, and even then it still has enough pen to have a 50% chance versus a full durability class 4. This is because its starting penetration at 41 is well clear of the 35 to 39 breakpoint area where the pen chance rapidly decreases. Given the velocity fall off is pretty much a straight line, we can deduce that at 50 meters the pen is halfway between the 0 value of 41 and the 100 meter value of 38.8, which gets us to 39.9. A pen of 39 is still a good 75% chance to go straight through a class 4, so for the most part we're actually alright with M80. Many other rounds though are not as lucky. If we take a quick look at BT for 545, we usually see this as a damage of 44 and a pen of 37. But even at 50 meters, this now looks like 42.1 damage and 35.4 pen. This gives 42% chance to pen class 4 and only needs 17% of damage reduction from the helmet to not kill with a headshot, which is what we're seeing in the tests in the field. As a reminder, armor roughly reduces the damage by 15 to 20% depending on the pen of the round and the class of the armor, even on a penetration. Basically, the takeaway from all of this is that rounds that have previously been used and suggested all over the place, and by me too, because they hit certain breakpoints of penetration versus certain classes of armor, don't work as well anymore, even at short distances like 50 meters, because of how sensitive the penetration calculation is around those numbers. Around the penetration values of 37, 47, and 57 versus classes of 4, 5, and 6 are super sensitive and will be affected by this the most. Given the class 4 pen is what we care about right now, the ammos to watch out for are your BTs for 545 AKs, M856A1s for 556 weapons, AP20 slugs for 12 gauge shotguns, and a little less so for the P90's SS190, but it can be caught in this category too. These can and are used up to 50 meters, so be careful. So from here, you might look at the regular ballistics chart penetrations and say, okay, well Subsonics for the MP7 and SS193 for the P90 should be caught in this too, right? They have 36 and 35 pen, so they must be awful now. Well, not quite, and here's the next interesting part about what the changes have brought about. We said before that rounds lose their velocity due to drag as they fly through the air, which in Tarkov is then reflected as a loss of damage and penetration. When we look at the charts for flight path, we can see that the loss in velocity is greatest at the beginning and then tails off towards the end. Subsonic rounds benefit greatly from this new model because they effectively start their trajectory in this end segment of the chart already. Let's take SS190 versus SB193 for the P90 to begin with as a great example. 190 has 49 damage and 37 pen with an initial speed of 715 meters per second, so it's a pretty speedy round, especially for an SMG type weapon. SB193 on the other hand has a starting damage of 54 and a starting pen of 35. But what we can see from the velocity charts is that because the starting speed of the 193 is so much slower, it doesn't have as much to lose in the first place. This is then reflected in the damage and pen charts, where at 100 meters you can see already that the SS190 round has a pen of 33.75 versus 33.7 of 193. Strange, eh? Obviously the downside of this is that it's moving nearly 3 times slower. The SB193 is much harder to land long range hits with, but out to 100-150 meters the trajectory is pretty flat anyway, so do we really care? Doing a quick calculation shows that the distance at which SB193 takes over in terms of pen is 105 meters, and it's better on damage at all ranges. At 100 meters, SB193 has nearly 52 damage versus just under 45 for SS190. This is enough to make a difference of 1 round on time to kill. As you might have guessed, you get a similar effect with the MP7 subsonic rounds, but it's not quite as bad because the gap between these two is 4 pen rather than 2. The crossover point here is 108 meters, and at this stage the MP7 starts to become less effective anyway, so it's not as much of a problem given it's typically pressed right into someone's face at point blank. One other standout number that is quite incredible is AP 6.3 versus the relatively new-ish round 7N31, which was renamed to PBP recently. Because PBP is really fast, for a 9mm Parabellum anyway, and has garbage ballistic coefficient, it slows down really quickly. This means that despite PBP having a base damage of 52 and a pen of 39, even at 50 meters this becomes 41.7 damage and 31.3 pen. Compared to AP 6.3, which has 48.5 damage and 28 pen at 50 meters, PvP is kind of pointless now over any kind of distance. Not that it was really meta in 12.12 anyway, with flea market restrictions and insanely expensive crafts. Have a look around at this part of the site for rounds that you like and generally tend to use, especially at medium ranges because it is really insightful. As it is super new, it is possible that there are some bugs or whatever, so bear that in mind when looking at the data, but I don't doubt the team's ability to make this super watertight if not already in the near future. The final section that I wanted to highlight is the armor charts tab. As we said before, the penetration chance by class is done at 100 meters, so between Battle Buddy and this site you can get a quick idea of what the pen chance might be at practical Tarkov ranges between point blank for Battle Buddy and medium Tarkov distances at 100 meters on Tarkov Ballistics. There are 3 more tabs here related to armor damage, blunt damage, and shots to pen chance. These are less stringent than the other information, so if you look at the armor damage by class for example and check APM versus class 4, which is the 366 AP ammo, this figure is an average across the armors in this category and again at 100 meters. If you hover over the number with your mouse you can see a min and a max, which should represent the higher or lower quality of armors in that class, but the idea is to give you a broad idea of what this round should be doing as an average against class 4. This is the same for all 3 datasheets here because the blunt damage for example will depend on what armor it is, because rigs let in more blunt damage for example, which will be represented on the higher number, and the better armors would be represented on the lower number. Shots to 75% penetration by class will depend on material and durability, so the ranges can get quite wide in some scenarios. All in all, I'm really excited about this tool because since the update in 12.12 the ballistics in Tarkov have become even more nuanced than they were before. As they said themselves, this is the beginning of the site and it will be open source so the community can build on what they've done also, and if that is so, then we have a data-rich future ahead of us. With the arguments continuing in the community around whether we should or shouldn't have one-tap headshots at larger distances with lower energy rifle rounds to how extreme the damage and pen drop-off is in general for meta rounds, I do expect some changes to come from BSG themselves as they tweak the system. So watch this space, do your research, and we can all get better together. As usual, if you learned something, please consider dropping a like and a comment. To see when I'm streaming, you can follow me on Twitter and Twitch. You can check out our weekly ScavTalk podcast in the links below, and with all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.